Hello everyone, this is James Shore with another test-driven JavaScript video. I'm recording this on January 25th, 2012, picking up right where we left off in the last episode. And in the last episode, we had just finished getting our second special case taken care of in our mouse handling code. So now when you leave the mouse area or the drawing area and then come back in, the drawing stops. And also when you start outside and come in, it doesn't start and it generally behaves nicely. So that's great. That's all tested. It's working. Now what I'd like to do is handle one last special case, and that is the case of when we leave the drawing area. I don't want it to do all this weird selecting stuff. That's one of the things that you see on the web, and it always feels kind of unpolished and clunky. If we start drawing that drawing area and then you accidentally go out for a little bit, we don't want it highlighting all the text. We only want it highlighting text if it starts outside the drawing area. So that's what I'd like to work on next. First, though, just a quick update to this code. In the last episode, we took out a bunch of we modified our events to work on the drawing area directly rather than ever looking at the whole document. And so some of the clunky stuff we were doing about is within drawing area, I don't think this will be necessary anymore. We should be able to take that out. And I just want to confirm that that's true. And it looks like it passes. And I'll take this out as well. There we go. And because this is event stuff and we're simulating browser behavior, I want to check it for real as well, just to be on the safe side. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and put that in. Took out unnecessary within drawing area. And we know they happen with the drawing area because our events are bound to the drawing area. Now, there is the case of if we have a bunch of padding around the drawing area, it's possible that you could go outside the drawing area but still be in the element. But I'm not going to worry about that for right now. It could actually be nice to be able to overdraw a little bit, have the line stop appearing, and then have your mouse keep working. That also brings up the question of whether or not having your mouse stop working when you leave the drawing area is actually nice behavior. It's the behavior we want. It may not be the best behavior, but I think that will be good for now. If this wasn't a demonstration, I might obsess over it for a couple of hours and fiddle, but I don't think you guys want to watch that. So let's move on. What we want to do now is we want to say that it does not allow text to be selected, or it does not allow elements like text to be selected outside the drawing area for drags that start within the drawing area. That's a bit on the verbose side, but this is kind of a complicated. Let's just say it does not allow text to be selected outside the drawing area when drag starts within drawing area. Okay, so basically we don't want the drags to overflow into the rest of the document. And I think this is going to be fairly easy to check actually. What we want to make sure is that we don't have, I think, now I haven't actually tried this, but I think if we just eat the mouse down event, then we'll be fine. So in fact, I'm going to go ahead and just try that again as a spike, because I don't want to, because this is more on the lines of a simulation in our tests. I don't want to spend a lot of time simulating stuff that isn't actually going to work. So here in mouse down, I think we can say event.stop propagation. So that means the document won't get the mouse down event, and I believe, although I'm not 100% sure, that will stop the text from being selected. Oh, I am totally wrong. Oh, that throws everything to... Okay, well, it looks like I'm going to have to go do some research. Back in a moment. Okay, I'm back. So I figured out my mistake. I was calling stop propagation, which doesn't prevent the default behavior of the browser. I've actually done a fair amount of research into this, and it it's really interesting. I'd never really delved so deeply into the event model before. So I'd like to take a moment to describe how this works for you. Basically, just to start out, it seems like the correct thing to do here is prevent default. And if we do that, we will see that we are no longer selecting text, at least not on Firefox. The research I did does seem to indicate that IE8 may not work correctly. So we will need to check IE8 and decide how we want to deal with that. And there's also the question of how are we going to possibly test this? So what happens is when we fire this mouse down event, it goes through the event model, runs in a capture event handler, then comes back through and runs a bubble event handler. And this diagram, this is the level 3 event specification, but this diagram shows it fairly well. It runs down, runs capture event handlers, gets to wherever our target element is, and then goes back up through running the bubble event handlers. At the end, after it's gotten all the way to the top, it runs the browser default event, the browser default behavior. And for most browsers, I couldn't find anything that said exactly what the default behavior was for each browser, but the default behavior for mouse down is typically a state machine, modify a state machine to say start dragging images or selecting text, which is of course what we want to prevent. So by calling prevent default, we're stopping the browser from doing its default thing. Stopping propagation, stopping the event from bubbling up to the top level, that doesn't stop the default behavior. Now you may be familiar in jQuery with doing this, return false. That is interesting. jQuery actually works differently than regular events. In jQuery, if you do return false, it will work because jQuery doing return false does two things. It runs event.preventDefault and event.stopPropagation. So what that means is, although I didn't actually see where the jQuery event handlers occur, I'm assuming they happen in the bubbling phase. So what that means is all the capture event handlers would come down, you do your thing, it returns false. It doesn't go back up, it doesn't run all these other event handlers, but it does run the default behavior. Even if it doesn't propagate the event, the default behavior does still fire unless you specifically call prevent default. So returning false prevents the event from bubbling up and it prevents the default behavior, which is in some ways more intuitive. A regular event handler, that is not a jQuery event handler, when you return false, all that does is stop propagation. It doesn't prevent the default. So I'm going to put this into a lessons learned video at some point. If it's not very clear, I'll have diagrams and do some really thorough research to make sure I'm getting all the details right. But that's my understanding of it right now. What we need in order to prevent the text from capturing is to prevent the default behavior. Allowing the event to bubble up is just fine. And in fact, not allowing it to bubble up could cause us some confusion or hassle later if we wanted to have, say, hover CSS or something like that. I think preventing the propagation of the event would also stop that CSS from working, although I haven't tried it. So this is what we want. Now the question is, how do we test it? Well, I think that will be fairly easy. And if it's not as easy as I think it is, then we're in trouble because I have no idea how to do it. So in jQuery, and this is again, I think something specific to jQuery, there's this method called isDefaultPrevented. So I think what we can do is we can actually just run this code effectively and then say drawing area is default prevented. So we should say expect drawing area is default prevented to be true. And that should fail, but not for the reason I thought it would. it said object doesn't support this property or method is default prevented. So I don't think drawing area is what I think it is. Oh, you know what's going on here? Is default prevented is something on the object, not, or is on the event, not on the actual jQuery element. Okay, I'm going to research this a bit more and back in a moment. Okay, I'm back. It looks like is default prevented applies on a event by event basis, which makes sense. So I think what we need to do is we're actually going to need to register our own event handler on the mouse event, on the mouse down event, and then say expect drawing area is default prevented, etc. to be true. And let's go ahead and say so we'll register that event and then we'll call mouse down. The rest of this isn't really relevant. And let's see if that works. Now this is sort of like mock behavior in that we're not really testing that the text isn't being selected, which is what we're trying to do. We're saying that we're running code that will prevent the text from being selected. And I think this is a lower quality of test, to be honest, because it's not actually testing what we care about. It's just testing that we've written code that we think will do what we care about. And sometimes that happens, particularly in UI code. You tend to run into cases where you can't actually directly test the thing that you care about, but instead you just check to see that you're running code. So for me, the best thing to do is to test what you actually care about. Second best is to do what we're doing here, which is to say, did the code we care about actually run? And third best is to mock and say, did we call a method that would normally do what we think it's going to do? So normally I want to test what's really important, but sometimes we just can't do that. So, and here we need to say event, not drawing area. Okay, so now we're seeing a failure. Expected false to equal true. So it's a terrible message, but what it's saying is that, I believe it's saying that the is default prevented didn't run. We're not seeing our high. And I think that's because expect throws an exception when it fails. Yeah, see, we see the A, but then we don't see the B. So this is failing the way we expect it to. So now we should be able to get this test to pass by running event.preventDefault here. And we did. And that does, in fact, work. Okay. Okay, so that's working. All that we have left to do is to make sure it works on IE8. I'm going to do that off camera and let you know. Back in a moment. Okay, I'm back. So it does not work in IE. And also I've noticed that it's quite slow in IE. Doing a little bit of research, so you can see there it's not preventing the default. And in fact, there's all kinds of weirdnesses happening here, which are probably related to that default as well. Now, in my research, it looks like what we can do is if we do the return false or set the event.return value to equal to true, that does look like it will work, but we are out of time for this episode. So next episode, we'll either make this work in IE8 or we'll let that be graceful degradation. I'm not sure which one, but that's what we'll look at next time. Thanks for watching, everybody. I will catch you next time.